So my mower's making a really bad noise and I can feel it vibrating. Full disclosure, I did run into a tree stump. So I'm worried that I've either bent the motor shaft up here or the bearing that supports this motor shaft. And so what I'm gonna do is take the blade off and get the motor out. This is a 15mm socket, and we can check and see if it's the bearing or if it's the shaft that's damaged. First thing you gotta do is make sure that we're safe. So pull out the batteries, pull out the high voltage interlock. Then we're gonna take these screws right here. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Now we remove the cover. There's gonna be 4 electrical connectors that are gonna be plugged in. I already popped mine loose. And we can set the cover area that holds the batteries aside. Next, we need to remove this black cover piece from the green part. In order to do that, it will take 6 screws. So there's 1 here, 1 here. There's 1 down here. It's hard to show with the camera. There's another one on this side here. And then there's 2 in back, 1 there and there. Once we remove those, we'll be able to see the motor. All right, we can finally see the motor, which is this part here. And my guess is it's gonna be this bearing right there that's gonna be damaged. So in order to get this black part off, we're gonna pop this connector and this connector. One trick that I found is if you leave these wires attached to this black part, and we just set this as an assembly off to the side. The only thing holding the motor in at this point are the nuts, these black colored 10mm ones, at the base of the motor. If you remove the 4 nuts, the motor will come out.
So if you notice this black shaft is bent crooked, that probably means that the entire motor's got to be replaced. But if this seems pretty straight, then there's a good chance that it's a bearing. And so to check that, I want you to take your left hand, grab this part. With your right hand, grab this part and wiggle this around. If it wiggles or clunks or moves in any way other than rotating, like this direction, that the motion I'm making with my hand right now, then it's probably this bearing here.
So there's pretty much 3 options at this point. First option, entire new mower. That's probably a few $100s if you can even buy it. I couldn't find the mower without batteries for sale. So then the second option is the motor. And here's the Greenworks number. So it's roughly $111. Or the other choice is to just buy the bearing, which looks like it's about $7. So I bought the bearing. Here's the number, 629Z. And this bearing supports this end of the shaft. And so we'll take apart the motor. It's just a T25 Torx bit, and it's these 4. So I'm gonna take those off. The really skinny ribbon cable, this one, this is for the encoder. This is gonna stay with this assembly, so be careful not to damage anything. These bigger cables, the yellow and red and black, they're gonna be part of this middle assembly. We got the ends of the motor taken off. This part here is the encoder, which is sensing how fast the shaft is spinning. This is what the bearing's supposed to look like. This bearing there is supposed to look like that. Doesn't have any balls. They actually were sprinkled inside of here. This is all magnetic, so they were sticking to that, and there's also shards of metal that I've cleaned out of here. All right, so I need to remove this portion here of the old bearing. So I'm just gonna use a pliers. You can use a vice grips, whatever it takes. You're just gonna twist this until it comes off. If accidentally the entire middle part, if this whole assembly comes out, that's not a big deal, that's okay. That middle section is called the rotor, and it's just held in place by the magnetic force right now of the outside part. So if that happens, it will just pop right back in. It's not a big deal. And then we also need to get rid of this old portion here. This is going to get pressed into there. So I just removed the green part. That's the encoder that had the wires that came through this rubber grommet and the green circuit board. I don't want to damage that because we're about to take either a flat blade screwdriver or a punch, and we're going to use a hammer and bash on this to remove the old bearing. So whether it's a screwdriver or like a punch like this, I'm going to just try to get it to catch on the edge of the old bearing, and then I'm going to tap with the hammer until I get that bearing to fall out. All right, so I got the old bearing out. That's what was lodged in there. Here's the new bearing. I've just loosely set it into this casting. And I don't have a bearing pressing tool. The 19mm socket was the easiest way for me to press this in, and I only needed one socket. So I just have the C-clamp here, and then the socket on this side, and I tighten this down until it's fully seated. I reinstalled the encoder circuit board, the green part with the wires, and then tighten these two screws back down. And while we're in here, we should also check the front motor bearing, see if there's any play in it. This one feels tight, but it could also be that this bearing is damaged. This one's a lot bigger, so it's probably more likely that the smaller bearing's gonna go out than the bigger one. But just while you're here, check if it needs to be replaced. All right, now we're gonna put the parts back together. When you tighten these, tighten this one, and then go across, and then go up, and then go across. What's going to happen is this half and this half may not come together nicely, and so by going in a crisscross pattern, it'll keep this from getting, it'll keep them parallel.